Hey guys, today I've got a very interesting greatest hits. I only cover the very first story that's in here, but let's talk about House of Secrets, number 92 from 1971. Alright guys, most of you know if you've collected comics for any amount of time that House of Secrets, number 92, is the first appearance of Swamp Thing by Wein and Berni Wrightson. And although it's a short story in this anthology tale, Berni Wrightson's artwork is just absolutely gorgeous in this title. This introduces us to Alex Olson, not Alec Holland, but this introduces us to Alex Olson, and this is his wife, Linda. And it also introduces us to Damien, who was his best friend and his lab partner until he got jealous and wanted Linda all for himself. So he ended up finding a way to get rid of Alex, and decides that Linda has also figured out his game, so decides to get rid of her as well, only to be thwarted by the Swamp Thing. So that's all I'm really going to talk about as far as the story goes. I'm not going to tell you how it ends, but it's tragic. And it sets up the tragedy that comes years later, 10, 12 years later, when Alan Moore takes over the title. He becomes so much more the tragic character than he already is. And that, of all the characters that have ever been created comic book-wise, I think Peter Parker is probably the unluckiest, but the saddest of all tales is probably the story of Alec Holland. Tongue-tied, guys, I'm sorry. The story of Alec Holland. Because he's a monster who doesn't see himself as a monster. He's a monster that never set out to become that which he is. And I did a video a while back discussing the spoiler to Alec's first outing with Alan Moore as writer. And I'm not going to give that away now, but let's just say Alec is so much more and so many deeper levels than just a universal horror monster. This character has got legs that can go on for centuries worth of stories. It's an interesting premise, to say the least. But it's tragic. And a lot of stories that are done in these horror anthologies, they end up as tragedies. They're not horror per se, but they're tragedy. They're tragic in their endings. Think about the Michael Fleischer Spectre books that Joe Orlando, as editor, wanted in the 1970s. He wanted to see the villain get their due. But in doing so, the ways that the Spectre dispatched these villains was often tragic rather than horrific. You had a guy that got turned to glass and then fell apart and shattered. You had another villain that was pushed into a wood chipper. Now, the way things are done these days in horror movies, that would be a horror thing. But at the end of the day, the tragedy came in that Jim Corrigan could never be with his lady love because he was already dead and she was still alive. So most of DC's greatest stories, Crisis on Infinite Earths, is tragic. So it has literally just hit me now, but you think about the dichotomy between Marvel and DC, and the reason that dark stories always seem to work better, and I say seem because we do have Kraven's Last Hunt with Spider-Man. But the way that dark stories seem to work better at DC is that DC seems to be the home of tragedy. Marvel never could have printed Sandman by Gaiman and Company. It just wouldn't have worked in their wheelhouse. Even if they tried to print it in the Epic imprint, it wouldn't have worked. DC was the perfect spot for it. So It's almost as though, since DC has Batman, DC is not afraid to look into the shadowy corners of the universe and the shadowy corners of the darkened room, whereas Marvel always tries to bring that humanity with lessons, but in a lighter tone. Not a preachy tone, but a lighter tone nonetheless. But this artwork by Berni Wrightson is just absolutely gorgeous. Even the cover is just amazing, the amount of detail that he put into it. The first picture of Swamp Thing. The first real, vision that you get of what Swamp Thing should look like. And sometimes his caricatures, like Damian here, are overly done and overly dramatic. But in other times, like when you have Damian's face here, you get the details and you get his paranoia creeping in. But anyway, guys, that was Swamp Thing's first appearance. And that is definitely one of the greatest hits of all comicdom. Len Wein, thank you for everything that you did. Berni, thank you for everything that you did artistically as well to create one of the most complex and interesting characters that has ever crossed the comic book pages. So, thanks guys for checking this video out. And I've got more content coming, so if you like this, hit that like and subscribe and come back for more next time.